Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Disgraced attorney Michael Avenatti hopes to reach a plea deal on more federal charges. Plus, the Candy the Dog trial. Could the civil case lead to legal reform? And
Ms. Redlick, on January 11th, 2019, did you stab your husband?
I did. Yes.
defendant and accused killer Danielle Redlick takes the stand. But first, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Hear more of Heard's first interview post-verdict. Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. In a continuation of her exclusive Today interview, Amber Heard touched on the topic of free speech in America. Nearly 2 weeks ago, a Virginia jury largely sided with Johnny Depp, awarding him $10 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages. Heard was granted a smaller win in her countersuit when jurors awarded her $2 million in compensatory damages over comments made by Depp's attorney, Adam Waldman. She was given nothing for punitive damages. The verdicts came after 6 weeks of testimony stemming from allegations that Heard defamed Depp in her 2018 Washington Post op-ed about domestic violence. While Depp sued Heard for $50 million, Heard countersued for $100 million, doubling down on abuse claims. In her first interview since the verdict, Heard stressed the importance of the First Amendment and discussed the differences in Depp's United States and United Kingdom defamation trials.
There was another trial handled dealt with the same substantive issues that had even more evidence in. In fact, my evidence was largely kept out. Really important pieces of evidence kept out. Done differently, handled differently by a judge instead of a jury.
Some evidence is admissible in a UK court that is not admissible in a US court. Do you think that maybe he just had better lawyers?
I will say his lawyers did certainly a better job of distracting the jury from the real issues. This is not only about our First Amendment right to speak.
But here's the thing about the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects free speech. It doesn't protect lies that amount to defamation, and that was the issue in the case.
Yes, exactly. You can't go into, the free speech does not protect you if you go into a crowded theater and you scream fire. We get the concept of free speech from the Greeks. My understanding of what that means is not just the freedom to speak. It's a freedom to speak truth to power.
But truth is the word.
Yes.
And that was the issue.
And that's all I spoke. And I spoke it to power, and I paid the price.
Meanwhile, there has also been confusion about the damages Heard was ordered to pay Depp. Following the verdict, Heard's attorney, Elaine Bennerhoff, indicated she did not have the money to pay her ex-husband. In a sit-down interview with Law&Crime Network's own Jesse Weber, Johnny Depp's attorney said the trial was not about the money, but instead about regaining Depp's reputation.
One of the things that's come out is people have been wondering, the monetary judgment, right? The $10.35 million. There's been discussion, would Johnny waive that? This has been more about this is more about winning back his reputation, his career, and not the money. Does he intend to enforce the judgment?
Great question. As Johnny testified, and we mentioned in closing, this is not about the money for Johnny. This is all about getting his life back, being able to work, and restoring his reputation. So money is not the primary object for him. So we expect there to be some discussions, but he sticks to that. Money, this wasn't about money.
Joining us today is co-host Terry Austin and Law&Crime legal analyst Kirk Nurmi. Kirk, what do you make of Heard's post-verdict interview so far? Could it affect any future appeals?
Well, I don't think it could affect any future appeals, Brian, because the Court of Appeals is going to make their decision based on the trial transcripts and the trial transcripts alone and the legal issues and how they relate. But when we talk about the ultimate resolution of this case, and we saw Mr. Chu talk about negotiations, it could really affect what happens post-verdict, if you will, because she's kicking the bear. She's almost doubling down on her defamation claims. And in that sense, that might motivate Mr. Depp to decide to collect on his $8.35 victory.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point there in of itself. Terry, let's get back to those damages, or let's get into those damages now that Kirk brought it up. Has Depp's team addressed the claim that Heard cannot afford to pay her ex? What happens if she really doesn't have the money?
Well, it's interesting. Ben, too, was very careful with his words in that interview. He basically said, what he had said during closing and what Depp said on the stand, that he didn't do this for the money, he did it for his reputation, trying to gain that back. Having said that, they should go after the money, and they probably will. I think Kirk is right. She's doubling down on what she said, and that basically is defamation, and it is an incentive for him to collect. And what he can do is put a lien on her wages. They can work out a structural settlement, but I do think at the end of the day, he should collect, and he probably will collect. It may take some time, but it makes sense as a matter of principle to go after that money, particularly since she's still saying the same thing she's been saying from the beginning.
All right, we'll see how Johnny Depp's attorneys handle that. Of course, you can't get blood from a rock, so to speak. So, as you said, Terry, it might just take a little bit longer, but we'll eventually get there. I'm curious to see if he says, you know what, donate, pledge, whatever word you want to use to actual victims of domestic violence. That could be another thing he does, but we'll, of course, keep an eye on this as it develops. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, a beloved dog is shot and killed in front of its owner. We look ahead to the civil trial. But first, accused husband killer Danielle Redlick takes the stand. We take you inside the courtroom for her testimony. Welcome back. The state rests its case and the defendant takes the stand in the Florida trial of Danielle Redlick, a woman accused of stabbing her husband to death 3 years ago. Redlich claims she killed her husband, Michael Redlich, in self-defense when she stabbed him in their Winter Park home in 2019. The two had been married for nearly 20 years and had 2 children together. Danielle's defense attorney said their relationship had a history of abuse and cheating. The couple had reportedly filed for divorce by the time of Michael's death. 911 calls reveal Danielle initially told dispatchers that Michael had stabbed himself and had a heart attack. Investigators say she waited several hours to call for help. Danielle is charged with second-degree murder and evidence tampering and could be sentenced to life in prison if convicted. Danielle and Michael's daughter, Jaden, took the stand on Monday. The judge didn't allow her testimony to be filmed, but she told jurors her mother was a primary source of toxicity for her parents' relationship. The defense called Danielle as their first witness on Tuesday. She testified to why she says she stabbed her husband.
Ms. Redlick, on January 11th, 2019, did you stab your husband?
I did. Yes.
Why?
He was suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, and he had me pinned down.
Can you explain more?
Well, I was scared, and I was just in fear for my life. He had thought he snapped, and I could die.
Why were you in fear for your life? Why did you think that you could die in that circumstance?
Just how he had me pinned down, and I couldn't breathe, and so just the look in his eye, his anger, and I couldn't get away.
Were you trying to get away?
I was.
Were you trying to use something besides a weapon to get away?
Yes.
Do you have any choice but to use a weapon to get away?
No.
How many times did you stab him?
Once.
Terry, now that Danielle Redlick has taken the stand, do you think her story is believable or credible?
You know, she had to take the stand, Brian, because she had so many different stories. She talked about a heart attack. She talked about she stabbed him. Then she said he stabbed himself. So basically, she had to explain to that jury what really happened. And she's coming across fairly credibly. She's talking about domestic violence that occurred before that fateful evening. She's talking about other times he hit her. She said she's called 911 in the past. She said she's gone to the hospital in the past. She's talking details about when she went to McDonald's and what happened and who texted whom. So she's coming across a bit credible as far as I'm concerned. Her affect, however, Brian, is not good. She's really stiff. She has no emotion. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably going to hurt her credibility with the jury.
Yeah, I would expect, I thought it would have come first, but maybe it would come second, that there would be an expert to talk about battered women syndrome, because that's what she's kind of describing, and maybe lay the groundwork. Hey, maybe I'm jumping the gun, maybe that'll come later, but we'll show that as it comes up. Kirk, what do you think of the prosecution's strongest argument could be in the cross-examination in questioning Danielle Redlick? Or Danielle, sorry.
Well, Terry's right. Terry's right. She's coming across very credible now, so they're going to have to attack her with facts that are undisputed. And as Terry kind of mentioned, we have some different and convoluted stories, right? We have that he had a heart attack, that he stabbed himself, then she says she stabbed him. And there's other facts that are really bad that make her look bad, right? The 11 hours, said she didn't call 911 because she couldn't find her phone. But hours later, she found it to go on a dating app. Then she waits, again, that 11 hours before she picks up the phone and calls 911 to make her reports. So I think the prosecution is going to want to hone in on that set of facts, those hours right before the killing. So they concentrate it right on that day, because that's where the state wants the jury to focus, and not any battered women syndrome that might exist beyond the scope of this particular day and this particular event.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they put that all together. And of course, we're continuing to follow this case gavel to gavel. Make sure to check out the Law and Crime Trial Network for more. Also in Florida, the sentencing phase continues for convicted killer Alan Wade. On Tuesday, a forensic psychologist testified about Wade's past trauma. More than a decade ago, Wade and co-defendants Michael James Jackson, Tiffany Cole, and Bruce Nixon were convicted in the murders of Reggie and Carol Sumner. Prosecutors say the group dug a hole in a remote wooded area before kidnapping the Sumners. The four then stole from the couple's home and forced them into the trunk of their own car. They later forced the couple to share their bank account information before burying them alive. Wade was originally given the death penalty, but a change in Florida law now requires a unanimous recommendation from jurors for the death penalty. On Tuesday, jurors heard from a forensic psychologist who described how Wade's trauma could have affected his actions.
I found instances of physical abuse, of sexual abuse, witnessing neighborhood violence, and being beaten and shot at. These are specific traumatic incidents. And I also found intense stressors that are also very chronic, and even though they're not like traumatic in the sense that they don't cause that, they don't involve the loss of life, for example, right? But they are very harmful, and they can lead to the same kind of damage that trauma can lead. People who go through the same negative experiences might have different problems. Some people might develop depression, some people might develop anxiety, some people might become violent, so it's very different. It's also very important to look at the developmental stage of where the person experienced the trauma. So we know that early trauma has a more negative impact on the brain.
Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, just days after a prison sentence is handed down, Michael Avenatti faces even more federal charges. Plus, the Candy the Dog case. We look ahead to the civil trial in Florida. Welcome back. We're looking ahead now to the so-called Candy the Dog civil trial, as a Florida dog owner works to bring justice for the death of his beloved dog and companion. The case dates back to 2016, when then 25-year-old Zachary Dieterle shot and killed Candy the Terrier mix, saying he feared for his life. At the time, Candy's owner, Rodney Jacobson, was working on his boat. Jacobson previously arranged to store his boat on Dieterle's father's property. Candy was off-leash when she approached Dieterle. He says the dog was in an attack stance. After that, Dieterle pulled out his revolver and shot the dog twice. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office says Dieterle was not charged because he had a permit to carry the weapon. They say he was also within his rights to use deadly force because he feared for his life. Jacobson says Candy had no history of aggression and was only barking at Dieterle because she did not recognize him. He says the ultimate goal of the trial is for the Sarasota Sheriff's Office to determine the shooting was not justified and to file criminal charges against Dieterle. Opening statements are expected to be presented this week. Terry, to start, was Dieterle within his legal rights to shoot and kill the dog if he feared for his life? What sort of outcome could we expect in this civil suit?
You know what, Brian, from a criminal perspective, if he really feared for his life and if he owned that firearm legally, then yes, he had a right to shoot and kill the dog, sadly. But from a civil perspective, they could really recover some damages from this claim. They are suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress. And as you know, that is one of my favorite causes of action. And they're suing for negligence. They're suing for trespass to chattel. So they have a number of causes of action where they could recoup a bunch of money from that, claim if in fact they do win. So if they can prove that they really were harmed and that they went for medical treatment and they had psychological problems, they could recover quite a bit of money, even if there was a right to shoot the dog.
Yeah, hey, I'm biased. I've got a 75-pound Doberman that's trained in Schitzen training. When you say attack stance, that to me sounds defending, because if a terrier wants you, it goes after you. But Kirk, that's a whole other story. Let's go to your question. Jacobson says he hopes the case will spark change in Florida law. So is it legal to shoot and kill someone's pet?
No, Michael, Brian, excuse me, as we just saw, it is not legal to just haul off and shoot somebody. As Terry said, the reason that the arrest didn't take place is because they felt he was a legal gun owner and well within his rights to shoot if he felt like his life was in jeopardy. But this case is really important, I think, in terms of dog ownership in Florida, because what constitutes somebody's life in jeopardy as it relates to a dog attack? This dog was in a stance, as you mentioned, Brian, and what gives someone the right to think that that stance is going to turn into chaos? It's hard for me to believe that Mr. Dieterle was really, really in fear for his life with this dog. So I think this case really it might set some important precedent in terms of holding people accountable for these kind of shootings.
Yeah, because as we know, self-defense is both objective and subjective. I'm not criticizing his subjective, I'm asking about the objective, but we'll continue to follow this case. And in Tennessee, a man convicted in his 5-year-old son's murder seeks a new trial, saying there wasn't enough evidence to convict him in the first place. A jury convicted Joseph Daniels last year, finding him guilty of felony murder in the death of his 5-year-old son, Joe Clyde Daniels, known by the nickname Baby Joe. He was also charged with first-degree murder, but the jury bumped that down to guilty of second-degree murder. Jurors also returned a guilty verdict on aggravated child abuse, initiating a false report, and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 51 years to life in prison. According to Tennessee news outlet WTVF, Daniels argues there was insufficient evidence at trial to convict, now saying his conviction should be thrown out. The motion will likely move to the State Court of Appeals, but for now, he will ask the Dickson County judge for a new trial. Earlier this year, Joe Clyde's mother, Crystal Daniels, pled guilty to serve 15 years for aggravated child abuse. She cannot appeal. When we come back, Michael Avenatti is back in court. Why a disgraced attorney is expected to take a plea deal as part of his latest lawsuit. Welcome back. A months-long federal trial in California is coming to an end as closing arguments were presented Tuesday in the trial of Ramesh Sunni Balwani, the former COO of Theranos and former boyfriend of its founder, Elizabeth Holmes. Balwani faces a dozen federal charges, accused of defrauding investors and customers after touting Theranos as having a revolutionary breakthrough technology in blood testing. Prosecutors seek to convince a jury that Balwani conspired with Holmes to scam investors out of millions of dollars. Similar to Holmes' federal trial, prosecutors brought in many of the same witnesses. But unlike her trial, the defendant, Sunni Balwani, chose not to take the stand in his own defense. Balwani's defense argued Holmes was in charge. She was convicted in January of 4 of the 11 counts of conspiracy and wire fraud that she was charged with, but acquitted of 4 counts alleging she deceived patients. Her jury was unable to come to a decision on 3 other counts. Last month, Holmes urged a judge to overturn her verdict. She is set to be sentenced in September. Also in California, disgraced attorney Michael Avenatti says he plans to plead guilty to charges in California, which allege he stole millions of dollars from former clients. The announcement to change his plea comes just 1 month before Avenatti was set to go on trial for embezzlement and fraud charges. He is charged with 36 counts of fraud, embezzlement, perjury, failure to pay taxes, and other financial crimes, accused of stealing $5 million from his clients. And just 2 weeks ago, Avenatti was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for identity theft and wire fraud, as he is convicted of stealing nearly $300,000 from his former client, Stormy Daniels. She was supposed to receive the money in connection with a book contract. Avenatti is already serving time for a separate conviction of trying to extort millions of dollars from Nike. The disgraced lawyer has asked to schedule a hearing to formally submit a plea change. He is set to go to trial at the end of July. Kirk, with Avenatti serving time basically all over the country in federal courts, in prison on wire fraud and other charges, what kind of plea deal do you think he'll strike with California?
My guess is he's really hoping that by accepting responsibility, and of course, nobody knows the evidence better than him. He knows what he's up against. So I think he's going to hope that he can go to the court, accept responsibility for everything he's done, be open and honest about it, say that he's doing it for altruistic reasons, and go forward and hope that the sentencing is concurrent, or that the bulk of it is concurrent, so he minimizes the time he spends in federal custody.
Yeah, concurrent and consecutive are going to be really big things for him. But Terry, guilty in California, New York, and probably new cases are going to pop up after this. But where does Avenatti serve jail time, and how does that work?
You know, the thing is, they're going to have to work out an agreement. As Kurt already said, we know that he was sentenced to 30 months for that Nike extortion out in California. He's been sentenced, as you said, to 4 years in New York for the Stormy Daniels case. And now these new charges, he really could receive a large sentence. It's a huge case. He's being charged with stealing $10 million in settlement funds from his clients, and he does want to be accountable. He's accepting responsibility. And for all of that, they may be able to work out a deal that he serves in a better facility, maybe California.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Thank you both. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.